I awoke with my head once again throbbing madly, and to my dismay, I was greeted by the sound of blood-curdling screams. Now louder than ever, it had become very dark and somewhat humid. Where the fuck was I? There was a faint orange glow coming from somewhere in the distance. It wasn't much, but it was enough to faintly see by. After a few hours of optical adjustment, that is. The glow illuminated what appeared to be some sort of vast underground bunker. The walls were shimmering with what I assumed to be water, and the floor was covered with moss and fungal growths. There was a vile smell in the air, and it reminded me of the basement below my mother's house. It smelled of damp. Where is it coming from? I tried lifting my head to look around, and felt a sharp tug on my hair, which sent a sharp pain through my head. Once again I tried looking up, only to be greeted with the same tugging. I went to reach for my head to see if my hair had been caught in some of the dirt when I hit the ground, or if some gruesome entity was holding it, but I quickly found my arms were also incapable of movement. I panicked and thrashed madly at whatever had me, and found that my legs and upper torso were also held tight. The black haze before my eyes began to lift, and I saw with hazy vision that I had been pinned down to some sort of rack on the wall with great leather straps. I failed in another attempt to break my restraints, but the straps proved to be too thick. I may as well have been trying to break through a wall. Nevertheless, the little spark of hope in my mind told me that if I continued struggling, after a while the restraints may begin to loosen, or maybe someone would hear me and find me. Do they ever stop fucking screaming? After what must have been the best part of 2 hours of non-stop wiggling in place, I finally gave up. My limbs and torso were red and bloody from where the leather had dug into my skin, and I felt a wave of despair hit me like a train, and cried tears of terror and anger. The screams have become louder still, and were more fearful. I heard the sound of someone crying hysterically, and another voice was shouting out incoherent words and sentences. The words I could make out were, "Never leave." I felt a dripping coming from above me, and a faint sound had begun to ring over the sound of the screaming. It was unlike any sound I have ever heard before. The only way I could describe it was like the clang a hammer makes when striking an anvil. But it was alive. It sounded as if this hammer had a voice to it, its clangs changing pitch rapidly, as if something was communicating with something else in some ancient language. I preferred the screams. The screams had structure. The dripping above me persisted, and I tried to crane my neck up to see what it was. I couldn't do it, obviously, but after a while the steady dripping on my head began to infuriate, madden me. I had to see what was falling on my head. It was my goal for the next hour. When I finally stopped trying to look up at the ceiling, all the muscles in my neck were pulled and aching horribly. I looked at the orange light again, and noticed it had gotten slightly brighter, like it was moving towards me. I dismissed it, and decided to try and get some sleep. That sounded like a wonderful idea, so I shut my eyes, and eventually fell into a very uneasy sleep. In my dreams I heard screaming and clanging.